Hi, I'm Nick Thomas and welcome back to the Academy of Historical Fencing, and today on HEMA at Home I'm going to be talking about feints. Now, you might hear from certain people that feints are a controversial subject, but certainly as far as British military swordsmanship and actually a lot of other forms are concerned, they're not at all. Like all techniques, they have their strengths and they have their weaknesses, but feints are a fantastic way to set up your opponent for failure. Okay, so when you go into a fight, normally you're going to be thinking about reaching out and hitting somebody, or parrying and responding, which is typical for certainly British military swordsmanship, but for loads of others as well. But when your opponent stands in a guard position, they are, or should be, in a strong defensive position. So let's say somebody takes up an outside guard position in front of you like this. They are protected along the outside line very nicely indeed. So you might be inclined to think to strike them here. But if I then make my parry, which is quite easy to do, I've then set myself up for a riposte against you. And essentially what I'm saying is your likelihood of landing a first intention hit, which is what was just described there, is actually quite slim. So landing first intention means there is an opening on your opponent, I reach for it and strike. That's a first intention hit. It's the ideal scenario if you can achieve it, but it's usually only doable against slow people, or if you are incredibly fast compared to your opponent. And then we need to find ways to make it land, because it becomes increasingly harder against more competitive opponents. We need to find other ways to hit them and set them up for failure. One of those ways is the feint. Okay, so a feint is just a deception. It means that we throw a short or a half cut of some kind. It can also be a thrust. It can even be a stamp of the foot, in theory. That's also part of some swordsmanship styles. But as far as we're concerned with Roworth, it's a cut or a thrust that draws them out into a parry position and allows you to hit them. And why would it do that? Well, it's all to do with the timing that those interactions take. Is that when we throw what looks like a full cut, so it has the intent of a full cut, they are forced into a parry, which means that in my half timing that I throw a half cut, they use a full timing to parry it. But because I've only used half the time launching it, so they've responded with a full motion when I only did a short motion, I'm able to make use of that time by hitting them where they are now exposed. So when we do a feint, what we're actually doing is we're saying that's where the opponent is currently strong. So let's say they're in an outside guard, this is where they're strong. We want to hit them there, so we want their sword to move out of the way. So what we want to do is throw a short cut that forces them to go to defend on the other side and then hit them where they were previously strong. So that is what a single feint is, because there are double feints. We'll go into that in a minute. But a single feint is, there is currently a target that is defended. We throw, they move, and then we're able to strike it. Now, you're not limited to exactly where you land the blow. It is about the inside and outside lines. Theoretically, you could go high and low as well, but normally it's about feinting one side of the line and attacking the other. Okay, so if we are now on an outside guard, the way we would do it is we would disengage over, because remember we're going to use a cut in this action. Again, you can feint with thrusts, but for now we're in the cutting section. Move over as if you're going to cut, and as they move to guard, you then rotate around and deliver your cut 2. So we're an outside guard, you feinted with a cut 1 and then transitioned into a cut 2, and this will normally be aiming at their outside arm. You could potentially go to deeper target zones such as their head, sometimes even their body, but the arm is the closest target when you're dealing with a style that keeps the hilt out in front like this. So normally when you launch this kind of feint, you are normally aiming for the lead arm. So there you have it. Outside guard, we throw a short cut 1, rotate around and throw a cut 2. And you'll see that this kind of training is really well suited to training at home, because although you haven't got a person or an opponent to respond to, you can go through the motions really, really nicely. So it is just a stop your cut short, transition into a full cut on the other side. And Roworth only actually describes basically 2 single feints, and that is what I just showed you, and then the opposite. But he goes on to say that you can launch essentially all kinds of feints, and that is true. You can use all of your 6 cuts, or 7 if you want to work from Angelo, And all of your 4 points, which are your thrusts, you can use all of those for feints as well. The only thing that matters with feints is that you sell them, which means that the opponent responds how you want them to, and that 2, you don't get hit when you're doing them, because that is the huge vulnerability of the feint. So when you are feinting, you are not actually showing any intent to strike. Well, you should be showing intent to, but you're not actually threatening because you're not launching an actual attack, and you're not always in a particularly guarded or protected position. So if your opponent at any time realizes or even thinks that it might be a feint, they'll be inclined to just come straight down the middle with a cut or thrust, and you may not be in a particularly good position to be protected against that. And that is the weakness of feints. Now, the interesting thing here is I talk about people selling feints and reading what actually is a feint in the fight. It depends on their skill level and their training. Is that when people have trained in a system like military swordsmanship of any kind a lot, they'll pick up on the smallest bit of motion and realize that it's a feint. So you can do something like this, just a small twitch, and it'll be enough against some people that have trained feints a lot for them to react. And at the same time, against somebody who's quite a beginner, you may have to sell it more because they're not used to those intricate details yet of the style. So against the beginner, if you do this little twitch, they may not respond at all. And of course, the whole point of the feint is we want them to react in the way that we want them to react. So against the beginner, you may have to do a more obvious feint, and you can throw it even more. You could theoretically bend the elbow. You're not supposed to. That's against the Roworth system entirely. But a feint, you can take chances if you want to throw certain feints. I wouldn't necessarily recommend bending at the elbow, but it is a way to do it. You can also lift. So you can lift as if to chop to the head. Again, you can potentially risk the hand. So it's always a consideration when you're doing feints is, are you safe? Are they likely to counter against you? Also, on that note, so when people time you is the issue. When you feint, they time you. And timing is just striking into the motion of your opponent, whether it's a disengage or an attack or anything like that. Expert fencers or really good fencers do those time shots a lot. And suicidal fencers do it a lot. And people who just think about scoring the point. So no matter what, they want to hit you. And there are lots of reasons for that historically and today. So historically, they could just absolutely hate you and want your blood no matter what. They could be fired up, adrenaline's pumping. They're just not thinking about defense. They just want to get in there and strike. In a modern perspective, we could just be thinking about, I want that point no matter what. The rule set sometimes might encourage it. So there are lots of reasons historically and in today's context why somebody might time you for the wrong reasons, essentially doing it in a dangerous way. But even if they do, we've got to be able to protect against it because that's their choice to do something stupid. We've got to be able to not get hit at the same time. So yeah, you're going to get timed hits from beginners, from really good fencers, and from some crazies as well. Anyway, that is the risk. So now, onto the side. If we're on outside guard, move over onto the inside with a short throw, no more than you have to, just as much to actually make them want to actually move over and defend themselves. Rotate back over with a disengage again, and strike down on cut 2. So it is just a short cut 1 for the feint, followed by a full cut 2, usually going for the arm. Now we can do the reverse, so we can start on our inside guard, then we disengage over the top, do a short throw 2 and stop it. As they move over, transition back to cut 1. And Roworth does make a point that people who are trained in this system tend to be better defended on the inside against feints. So he does recommend more working towards the outside, particularly in the double disengage section. So the double disengage just means that we're now not aiming to strike the first target that we looked at. So remember I said outside guard, and I said that's the strong bit. We're aiming to get people out of the way to hit that point. Well, a double disengage doesn't do that because it goes back to the other side. So a double disengage would be, for example, I throw a feint cut 1, I throw a feint cut 2, I go back to a full cut 1. So that's a double disengage. Now, you might do a double disengage intentionally from the start, knowing what kind of responses you're going to get from your opponent, especially if you fence with them quite a lot. Or you might do it, as Roworth recommends it in his manual, if they basically manage to defend against what was initially going to be your proper strike. So, and this means you've got to be thinking about it in the fight. You can't tactically go in with all the plan that you've got and expect to get away with it. So what he'd say is you throw your 1, as you go to do your cut 2, they realise what you're doing and go to defend, so we go back to 1. So we have to be able to dynamically adjust as we go, depending on what the opponent's doing. So don't think you can always go in with the game plan of, I'm going to do a double feint, and that's it. And also, double feints, they are obviously doubly as dangerous in terms of timed hits. So going in with the intention all the time of, I'm definitely going to do double feints, could really open you up. And if people start to see you doing that as a pattern, they'll nail you more and more with the timed hits. Right, so that's the single disengage and the double disengage. I did say you can use all of your cuts and all of your thrusts as feints and as double feints. And then obviously what strike you land after it, you can mix up any of those 6 or 7 cuts and 4 thrusts. But the only ones Roworth describes are essentially coming down as 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. So do have a mix and a play with those, and just have a play solo. So you could, for example, from here we could throw a feint 1 and then go into a cut 4. So if you watch sabre videos, that's what Mike does all the time. He loves the cut 4 because he comes up onto the arm or onto the flank with it. That's really quite effective. So mix it up. Likewise, you could start on your inside, throw a feint 2, and then go into a cut 3. That's all. Those are all good options. And then when you do your double feints, again, throw in the mixture. You'll often see with a double feint people just doing that, that, and that. And that's really quite simple. So we did a feint 1, feint 2, cut 1. That's really quite common. So you've got your single feints and double feints. Absolutely, you can use point work, although I haven't done a video on thrusts yet. That'll be the next video. But I will just mention that I particularly like to thrust high on the outside, like this, as a feint, and then transition through, cut 1 onto the head. So Roworth did say that people are better at defending the inside against feints. But personally, I find that if you use that thrust, so that'd be a thrust in tierce. So we thrust over the top. It really does threaten their face, and then we transition and strike to their head. So that's just one of my personal favourite feints. We can, of course, use feints for setting up leg shots. They're the best way to set up leg shots, or to do leg shots on the recovery is the other good method. But in terms of you aggressively setting them up, a feint is the way to go. You can easily throw high cuts either side and transition to the leg. But like I said on multiple other videos, every time you do this, you open up your arm and your head to time shots or even fast counters. So use them sparingly and have a play with them. Get bashed in the head a good few times and you'll see what you like and see what works for you. In terms of anything else to say about feints, you notice I have the different weapons here. So we have in Roworth, spadroon, sabre, broadsword, and also the hanger. So we've got a range of all the swords in use at the time, and which ones do what the best and most effectively. Well, Roworth does say that the broadsword isn't so well suited to thrust work. It can be to do with weight and also grip space. Now, that varies immensely from one basket hilt to another. Some of them are really, really enclosed and you can barely move anywhere in them. And some of them actually have a fair bit of room and you can. So that's going to vary. So this is actually got a reasonable bit of room. I'd say this is a medium-sized basket, if slightly larger, but it's got a bit of room in it. But I can't get as good a thrust as with the spadroon and the sabre, but still pretty good. But in terms of the feints, they actually work absolutely fine, no problem either way. So the basket hilt doesn't have a problem with feints, the sabre and spadroon don't have a problem with feints, but mass in the tip of the blade is a factor, because with a feint we're expected to stop the blade mid-motion and rotate and move on to the other line. We're not you know, powering through a cut and then using a circular actions to come back into guard like the cutting exercise. We are stopping and moving back to the other side. And the speed that you can do that will all depend, apart from your strength, obviously, strength and conditioning, apart from that will depend on the amount of mass up here, because this isn't so much important to stopping the tip and moving around, it's how much mass is up here. And therefore, the broadsword, they vary. These can be actually quite agile on the tip, or they can be very heavy, hugely varied. Now, if I go to a cavalry sabre, so this is a 1796 light cavalry, a lot heavier than an infantry sabre. Not hugely larger, a little bit, but it just has a lot of extra mass in the tip, which means the balance point goes from approximately 12 to 14 centimeters on an infantry sword to 18 or 19 centimeters. It means it's got a lot of mass up here. And what that means is that when we throw, it takes a lot more energy to stop that feint and a lot more to restart it to deliver your cut. So it is absolutely possible to throw feints, but you can see it is far from easy by comparison. So if you have a lot of mass in the tip here, you're going to find feints with the cut to be quite difficult. Well, not difficult, but clumsy and slow by comparison. Whereas if we launched with the point, it's actually still quite quick because we're not having to fight the mass to stop it and get it restarted again. Now, if we go to an infantry sabre is sort of in between and depends again how much mass you've got, but most of them are not too bad, in which case these actually move through quite nicely. So, closing remarks. The spadroon is obviously incredibly well suited to feints because it's the most agile of the lot. It has little mass in the tip, which is exactly what I was talking about. And by having little mass in the tip, we can stop it quickly, redirect, go anywhere we want with it. So feints are your friend when you have a light blade. Or when I say a light blade, a blade with a little mass in the tip. So use that to your advantage. It's one of the things the spadroon is awesome at. What else did I want to say? I think that was it. I'm sure I had one more point. No, I think that was probably it. So, yeah, that is feints for you. So have a play with them at home. Go through your usual exercises, your cuts and your thrusts. I'll do that thrust video for you next. Yes, I remember what I wanted to say. About where you launch your feints in terms of at which point of your footwork. So this is a common thing that comes up. Do we launch them as we're moving, or do we launch them from a fixed footing position? In theory, they should be launched from a fixed footing position because you need to know your opponent is moving over and they're not going to time you. So if you're already moving forward, you're more at risk of being timed. So theoretically, it should look like this. It should be a throw, and then as they move over, we launch our lunge. In reality, as things get faster and faster in the fight and it becomes harder to land hits, you may find yourself moving out at the same time. It does mean you've got to be more confident in your feint and confident in their response. So again, everything is a risk. If you move with your feint, you're going to sell it better and have more chance of landing the blow. If you don't move with the feint, better chance of selling it. No, not necessarily better chance to sell it. Better chance of defense. You have to make up your own mind on that. You can also do an in-between, which is what I personally like to do, is I like to bring up one or either foot as I do it. So I might step off the front one just a little bit, like this. So I've done just a small step, which has gained me part of my lunging distance, but not put me in a dangerous area. And then I finish the lunge as I go through. Or I might bring up the back foot as I throw it and then do my lunge, which has got me a bit more ground, which is, you know, like Roworth's advance. So there you go. Have a play with it with all the different swords. Spadroon is awesome at it. Too much mass in the tip. It's a bit slow. And just, yeah, experiment with your different cuts and thrusts as both feints and then as attacks. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please do subscribe if you haven't already.